The best thing about being an options trader is it allows me to homeschool my children. It's important that I teach them the right way to think about the world as early as possible. Here's a picture my son made for me during his art class. I think it's beautiful.
What's going on, everybody? This is David W. Williams, also known as Diamond Dave. Let me know what part of the country that you're coming out of. Let me know that you can hear me. And we go ahead and get started. Appreciate everybody for coming through. So what we're going to talk about today is that MAGA does not understand capitalism, so they're blind to the facts, right? And we're going to be talking about this H-1B1 visa situation that happened, I want to say maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago. And we're not late to it because what we do here is we produce a lot of evergreen content. The story's relevant whether or not it's trending, right? And it's not just MAGA that doesn't understand it. It's most Americans don't understand it, right? That's their issue. So most Americans don't understand it. And what we find ourselves doing, and something that we really try to combat where we're at, is that when we don't have the information or have the tools to come to the correct conclusion, or to come to the conclusion that is most appropriate based on the facts that are in front of us, what we do is we come up with stuff. We just invent things. And then we build a whole narrative based on this invention that came out of our psychology. And then we wonder why it's not working for us. And that's something that we have to deal with, and something that we spend a lot of time on this platform trying to combat that particular situation. So the show is being sponsored by www.thehighestpaid.online. I want to encourage everybody to look into the Lazy Investor Start Course. That start course is designed to help you understand how you can get started investing without having to be an expert in the market, without having to be a genius, without having to spend a lot of time looking at the market and trying to really understand the ebbs and flows of the market, but to persuade you that it would benefit you to get invested in the equity markets, and it'll show you a really easy way for you to get invested. And it'll walk you through that process so you can get started today so you can benefit over the long term. And I want to really encourage you to move forward on that, because our prices never stay the same. Over time, the price of that particular product will start to move up. We got it at the best price in the world right now. It's a steal, right? So go ahead and encourage you to look into that. We're going to talk about MAGA does not understand capitalism, so they're blind to the facts. So really quickly, what I want you to do, because one thing about this platform is often we just go right into it. And if you're new to it, and I know that a lot of people don't go through the library of what's on the actual, I would say, channel, we have over 1,000 videos. A lot of our content builds off previous content. So very similar to where when you start college and you're taking a particular mathematics class, they assume you've taken previous classes and you understand what's going on. So they're building off previous content. Therefore, if you're new to the channel or you haven't gone through a lot of the previous content, what we're going to talk about and some of the principles that we're going to talk about may not make sense to you. And again, you may find yourself making things up just to have something make sense to you. And the problem is that that's not really what's going on. So what you can do from to build up like some primary or build up some fundamental understanding, you can go through the channel. We have a video called Why It's Dangerous to Be Surplus Labor in 2022. That's definitely what we're going to talk about here, is we're going to continue to expand on this economic concept of surplus labor. That was done 2 years ago. How not to be surplus labor in the economy. That was done 3 years ago. This Australian property developer talking about a year ago that we need surplus labor. And then another video, you may want to go into the Capitalism Does Not Work videos. Another video done 2 years ago on why you need to become unemployed to stop inflation. And the reason why I know people don't watch these videos is because as the channel builds up more people, those video views don't go up. So we got a solution for that. We're probably going to pull a lot of videos off the channel and make it kind of like a Netflix type platform, to where if you want to watch those videos, you just have to pay to watch them because they're there, but they're really not being watched. And I just think they may be better served somewhere else for the audience that really wants to see them. But they're there. So what we're going to do in this video is we're going to assume that you've already gone through that content. You understand these particular economic principles. You understand supply and demand. You understand surplus and shortages in the economy. And then we're going to just move on from there, because you have to understand these principles and you have to understand the desires of capitalism to really understand this properly. And so one of the biggest challenges that a lot of people are running into is that they believe a falsehood around something. And then they try to make the falsehood work, and then they're wondering why it doesn't work. Because it was a falsehood. It never worked that way in the first place. So that's some of the challenge that a lot of people are running into in this situation, but also in a lot of other situations, right? So I want to go ahead and give you a heads up on that. So we're going to go into this particular article, but what I want you to realize is that Trump already talked about this issue with the H-1B1 visas before, but for some reason, after he got elected, he kind of changed his tone. So let's go into what he talked about. Let's say, I don't know, a few weeks ago. It was a few weeks ago during New Year's. Let's go ahead and get into that.
Why did you change your mind on H-1B visas, sir?
I didn't change my mind. I've always felt we have to have the most competent people in our country. We need competent people. We need smart people coming into our country. And we need a lot of people coming in. We're going to have jobs like we've never had before.
But why did you change your mind on H-1B visas, sir?
I didn't change my mind. I've always felt we have to have the most competent people in our country. We need competent people. We need smart people coming into our country. And we need a lot of people coming in. We're going to have jobs like we've never had before.
Okay, so Trump is saying that he didn't change his mind on H-1B1 visas, that we need smart people, we need competent people, we need people more than we ever did before, yada, yada, yada. And I really believe that because of who he's aligned himself with, he's had to change his position on H-1B1 visas, right? And we're going to get into a little bit more because what I want to talk about is this argument that people were trying to frame that we need the H-1B1 visa program to bring in the best and the brightest. And so what makes us different here than a lot of these other channels is, one, we don't care about the trending topic because a lot of these topics are evergreen. And two, as opposed to you just getting my opinion, we're going to actually give you data around the situation because the goal is for you to understand how to do these things on your own, right? There's too much information available to the average person to where you're still dependent upon other people to tell you what's going on. You just have not been taught probably a process on how to take that information and develop a model so the situation can make sense to you, or how to solve your problems with the information, right? But that's the story. Okay, so Trump previously talked about him being against the H-1B1 visa program and him not believing that that was a legitimate program, and now kind of changing his story, his narrative around it. And a lot of the MAGA people that are nationalists, and what I mean by nationalists is that they are very much pro-American. They believe that opportunity should go to Americans first. And they're also what we call economic protectionists. The economic protectionist is a person where they believe that they should protect certain industries and certain economic sectors from people that are outside of industry or outside of the economic sector. So a good example of an economic protectionist would be Dr. Claude Anderson. Dr. Claude Anderson taught economic protectionism. That's what he taught. He believed that Black people should participate in that. Because Black people don't really understand economic protectionism that he's speaking to, he had to break it down into these particular points in which people can get it. But Dr. Claude Anderson is an economic protectionist. Steve Bannon is an economic protectionist. Trump ran on an economic protectionist platform. What we're seeing now with this H-1B1 visa situation that he's kind of moved on, he's no longer sitting in that economic protectionist camp. So that's kind of put him at odds with Bannon. That's put him at odds with a lot of his supporters because they believe that because they're Anglo-Americans, that they should have the ability to get hired first and do things first over everybody else. And that's something they often believe. And so we got to kind of really ask ourselves, is that what is really required or necessary, or are we doing something different? So what I want to kind of go through is kind of this particular story, but I also wanted to go into some data where it can kind of show these people that got these H-1B1 visas, what jobs they're getting and what they're getting paid, because that really speaks to how the market really perceives them. And that doesn't allow people to run away with a narrative. And we're going to kind of talk about some of the narratives that came up. So I don't have any mods in the chat right now. So I'm gonna give you a heads up. If I peep that you're kind of like just all over the place with comments, I'm gonna time you out myself, and then you ain't gonna come back after that. So you can interact, you can speak, yada, yada, yada. But what I don't want you to do, and I don't know if you can control yourself, is I don't want you to get off track in what we're talking about, right? Because I think one of the challenges that a lot of people have is they want every environment to be a free-for-all because that's how they run their life. But again, if that's not working for you, why do you think it'll work anywhere else? So everybody can talk. I encourage you to have conversation. But if you're not here to deal with this particular issue and to stay in line with this issue, I'm telling you, you ain't going to last long, right? So it's on you. It's not on me. It's on you. So I just want to really encourage you to really try to focus, maybe get some prayers up to try to ask God to guide you in the right direction. But it's not a free-for-all over here, because I think that's one of the reasons why we can't get certain things brought out properly, is because people are looking for the free-for-all. But again, if that's not working for your life, why you want to bring that somewhere else, right? So let's go ahead and get into the content. So here's this particular article. Musk and Ramaswamy sparked this particular debate about the H-1B1 visa. Here's what we want to know about the visa. We're not going to get into that. But we know that this particular visa and their businesses rely on thousands of foreign engineers and other skilled workers from India, China, other nations. So the tech industry has long called for H-1B1 visas to attract highly skilled workers to the U.S., although Trump first restricted the program in 2020, arguing that would allow businesses to replace Americans with lower paid foreign workers. So when Trump was in office the first time, he kind of got into friction with the tech industry, especially on the West Coast, because he was asking them, why are you bringing these people in to do these jobs and we have Americans to do these jobs? So he was low-key against it because, again, Trump was an economic protectionist. That was the part of the MAGA platform that he ran on. So this debate has erupted after Musk himself once on an H-1B1 visa, which is incorrect. Musk came in on a student visa and then overstayed that student visa, and whose electric company, Tesla, has hired workers using the program, defended the tech industry's need to bring in foreign workers. Ramaswamy, for his part, wrote in an X post that American culture has venerated mediocrity over excellence, leading to a nation that does not produce the best engineers. Then Musk wrote on X, there's a permanent shortage of excellent engineering talent. It is a fundamental limiting factor in Silicon Valley. Okay, so what they're trying to do is they're trying to frame a narrative. Ramaswamy comes out of this camp of quasi-libertarians, and they want to always push this meritocracy narrative in everybody's faces, even though that's not how they got to where they're at. Okay, but they know that that works because they know the average Anglo-American wants to believe that America is a fair place. And if we just operated on fairness and meritocracy, then we can live up to the ideals of America. So Vivek has been able to get into a lot of doors waving that flag. And then also this narrative that there's a shortage of what we call excellent engineering talent. I believe that excellent means in this particular scenario that the engineering talent is greater than average. So we have a certain baseline of engineering talent. Those people aren't good enough. So we have to import those people in from outside the country to fill the need of Silicon Valley. So really what they're saying from an economic standpoint is that there is a shortage, an economic shortage, and we have to go outside of the country to fill that particular need. So that's what they're selling to people. And so you have to understand what they're trying to get people to buy into to understand what they're really saying, right? Okay, so that's kind of how they're framing it. Now, here's what I want you to understand, because this is the first way in which this particular debate unravels. My bad for that. There's something called this O1 visa, right? And that's visa for individuals of extraordinary ability or achievement. So individuals with extraordinary ability in sciences, education, business, or athletics, not including the arts, motion pictures, or television industry, right, have the ability to get what we call an O1 visa. And so what you have to understand is that if there's a person on the other side of the world and they have extraordinary ability, then they could get an O1 visa, right? So why do we have this large demand, but we're asking for H-1B1 visas. So they're selling to us that we need to get excellent people from other parts of the world, but they're not extraordinary. So then how come they're not getting the O1 visa? But if I don't know what the O1 visa is, and I don't know that, so then I'm arguing over the H-1B1 visa, but I don't even know what the O1 visa is. So because people don't really understand how this program actually works, they're going to argue the wrong point. So the first way in which this particular argument falls apart is that if you're in India and you're just a genius engineer, why don't you go get an O1 visa? Or you're in China and you're just a genius person in what you're doing, why don't you go get an O1 visa? And we don't see that because they're really not geniuses, and there's a lot of data to support that, right? In fact, many people would argue that they're probably worse at what they do than Americans, right? We could argue that. But if we haven't gone through the data, then we won't know that. So we're just arguing to argue, right? But that does exist. It still exists. But the tech space hasn't looked to pursue this because the people that they're going after, I would argue, are not really extraordinary in their talent. So then they know they wouldn't be a good candidate for the O1 visa because it's going to be hard to do numbers. They're looking to do numbers. It's going to be hard to do numbers with this particular visa program. Okay, so that's the first place in which I believe this argument starts to unravel. Okay, then we know that at one time when Vivek was running for president, he wanted to get rid of the H-1B1 visa program, even though he used it to fill slots in his own company, his own like biotech company. So this is from 2020 through 2023, when he was running. He wants to gut the system if he wins the White House. So from 18 to 23, 29 applications for his former company were used to hire employees that were getting H-1B1 visas. But when he runs for president, he tells them that the H-1B1 system is bad for everybody involved. The lottery system needs to be replaced by actual meritocratic admission. So again, he's leaning into this merit narrative. It's a form of indentured servitude that only accrues to the benefit of the company that sponsored the H-1B1 immigrant. Are gutted. The people who come in as family members are not meritocratic or meritocratic immigrants who make skill-based contributions to this country. So again, he's leaning into this merit idea because Vivek's thing is, I'm just going to keep telling you that if we just run this country based on merit, everything would run correctly. But then when he runs for president, he says, I want to get rid of the H-1B1 system, even though he used that as a business person. And now, because of the people that he's running with, and he doesn't, I just believe that he doesn't want to get at odds with Musk. He now states, well, there's an issue with American culture, and that's the reason why we're not producing the best and the brightest anymore. So this was this little Twitter post that he put up. We're not going to read it because Vivek is very verbose in everything he does, and it's a technique that he uses. Some people, if you talk to them long enough, they just kind of get hypnotized by what you're saying. He utilizes that. And I often wish that he would just get to the crux of the issue, because you can ask him a question, he won't answer the question, but he'll talk for 30 minutes. Like, it's just weird, but that's what he does, right? So he says that the reason top tech companies often hire foreign-born and first-generation Americans over Native Americans, the key part of it comes to the C-word culture. Our American culture has venerated meritocracy over excellence for a very long time. That doesn't start in college, it starts young. A culture that celebrates the prom cream over the math Olympia champ or the jock over the valedictorian will not produce the best engineers, yada, yada, yada. I know multiple sets of immigrant parents in the 90s who actively limited how much their kids could watch TV shows precisely because they promoted mediocrity, and their kids went on to become wildly successful STEM graduates. Then he goes to this particular narrative, yada, yada, yada. Normalcy doesn't cut it in a hyper-competitive global market for technical talent. And if we pretend like it does, we will have our butts handed us by China. So what he's saying, and this is where a lot of Anglos got upset up with him, because he was talking about Anglos. He was saying that there is a culture of mediocrity that they have bought into, and it venerates that or promotes that over excellence. And so that's what really created the controversy. The problem, again, is that there's no data to support what he's saying. So again, anytime I deal with somebody that comes from a foreign country and they try to sell that they have a culture of excellence in their foreign country, but they're in America, I always ask them, how come that didn't work in your foreign country? And that's often going to be the end of the conversation, right? Because there is something different about America, right? To where these people desire to come here. And it's not the whole world. The whole world doesn't want to come to America. It's very specific countries want to come here. But there is a reason why so many Indians desire to come here, right? There is a reason why so many people south of the border want to come here. But anytime you hear somebody come to America, they immigrated. And they say the reason why we were successful in America is because of our culture. You know, a lot of Africans, especially Nigerians, try to play that little game. You always got to ask them, how come that didn't work in your own country? How come your cultural attributes that give you an advantage in America don't give you that same advantage in your native land? How come that desire to be super competitive doesn't build a competitive nation for your people? And they'll often just stop talking to you because they know that that narrative doesn't work on you anymore, right? So that's what I want you to understand, is that we've built something here to where certain groups want to come here because they believe it to be better for them here than their own country, right? So that's why Vivek is just talking, because Vivek is very, very successful and he has no desire to move back to India, right? But it's the culture that he's stating is, Vivek is, very, very financially successful. He has no plans to move back to India. He wants to be an Indian or, a descendant of Indian immigrants inside the United States and benefit from what the United States has done. But in telling Americans that it's their culture is the reason why they're not competitive anymore. But we're more competitive in India. That's why you're here. So this doesn't make any sense. But again, when you don't have facts to support anything, all you can do is reply with emotion. And they know that. So what they do is they just hit emotional hot buttons because they know that many of us have not been taught to bring facts to a situation, right? So there was a really good conversation between Vivek and his pastor. And the pastor told him that, well, why don't you talk about your actual religion instead of just spitting? Vivek, he wouldn't touch it because he knew he couldn't play that game with that pastor. It is not to say that that pastor was right or wrong, is that the Vivek couldn't play the emotionalism game with him because the pastor was saying, just actually explain your religion to me. Vivek just started talking about Thomas Jefferson and everything else. That's his strategy. And he's learned it as a really good debater, right? To not get boxed into a particular area to which he can't be successful. And he knows that the average person doesn't understand that's what he's doing. So that's what I want people to realize, is that when immigrants or the sons and daughters of immigrants talk about their culture being the reason, I always ask, how come that culture didn't work in their own land? Right? And you never get that explanation. So what about America was so attractive to them, even though their culture is so superior, which is why they're successful? Why wouldn't they just do that where they're from? Wouldn't they have more of an advantage where they're from? Wouldn't it be more beneficial to them and their people to build where they're from as opposed to come to America? And you just never can get those questions answered, right? So we're not going to stay there long. Let's go in and go into this, right? I want to big up this guy, Robert Sterling. He spent a lot of time aggregating and compiling this data. And I may not have done this because he did this for free from my understanding. And this is the type of work that you often have to do to get an understanding of what's going on around you. So this is the reason why people will do live streams or just talk in circles for 2 hours. Because either they don't want to do this work, the audience doesn't appreciate that they do this type of work, or they don't know how to do the work. So some of the biggest channels are just people talking, because that's really what the audience wants. It allows everybody to give their opinion. It allows everybody to talk about what they want to talk about, because once you bring facts to the table, then it kind of frames things a certain way. And people really don't want that. So big up to this guy. He did the actual work. So he talks about, He downloaded 5 years of H1B1 data from the Department of Labor website. That was 4 million plus records, and spent the day crunching the particular data, right? And so here's what he found, and we're going to go to get into it. So the program has a statutory limit of 85,000 visas per year, but employers routinely receive approval for more than 800,000 applicants per year, or 10 times the limit in 2024. So we're seeing that every year, this is how many applications they're getting, right? So right now, we're at 800,000, really over 800,000, but there's a limit of 85,000 visas per year. So this particular program is very much in demand, right? So employers are very much trying to utilize this program to fill labor. Okay. So again, we were told that there's a shortage of excellent people. Well, there has to be a massive shortage with this many approvals. And I don't think people are getting that. See, so we're being sold that there's a shortage. Musk talked about there being a shortage of excellent people. Well, there has to be a massive shortage with this many approvals for this many applications in 2024. That's 800,000. Really, it's 868. So our engineers inside the United States, our tech people, our STEM people, they must just be idiots. Like, they have to be. Or there has to be another reason why foreigners have become attractive to employers. So are they idiots? Is that the reason why they're just not that smart? Or is there another reason? So where is the data taking us to why this particular program is so attractive to employers? But see, if we don't never put no data on the table, we just going to talk about, I don't know what particular show Vivek Ramaswamy talked about, where that show was supposed to be framing like life in America. We're going to talk about all those things because, again, we don't have any data and we don't want any data. So let me tell you a real quick story. 1,000 years ago, people had no concept of what evaporation was. So they would say stuff like, when it's raining, the gods are crying. And that's what they would come up with because they didn't know science. So it's not to eliminate faith, but it's to understand that there is actual science going on around you. But when I don't have an answer to something, what I do is I just make up an answer. But it don't mean it's the right answer. It just means the answer I made up to try to answer the question I have inside my head. Therefore, when we don't understand, one, that you can even do this, that you can pull this information from the Department of Labor site, you can compile this information, you can frame it up in a way in which it can be read to understand around this particular issue. We just going back and forth. We talk about meritocracy, yada, yada, yada. But just with this first slide, there must be a massive shortage of excellent people inside the United States for these particular positions if we have this many applications per year. That's almost 1 million people in 2024. So I want you to understand that's what's going on. Okay, let's keep going. So the average salary for H1B1 is relatively low, slightly under 120K. He said he assumed it would be lower. So we see that the salaries are going up, but it's around 119. So again, we're being told that there's a shortage of excellent people. So they have to now go overseas to find excellent people. But what we're showing is that the average salary, not the median though, but the average salary is right under 120K. Now, that's a decent amount of money based on what part of the country that you're in. But if you're on the West Coast, which is where Silicon Valley is doing a lot of hiring, anybody that's on the West Coast, what is $120,000 on the West Coast? Is that big money? If you in the Bay Area, is 120K a year? Is that big paper? Do you think that if I'm in the Bay Area and I'm excellent in the STEM field, right? I'm one of the leading people in my particular, I'm in high demand in the STEM field because of how excellent I am. My income on the West Coast is going to be 120K a year, right? So the numbers already are telling us there got to be something else going on. So this, see what I'm saying? But if all I have is just Vivek's Twitter post, and I got Elon Musk saying what he's saying, and I don't know where to go to get any information, I'm just going to have an argument because I'm just going to get caught up in how I feel. Right? So that's the issue. So that's why I always continue to push, understand how to use data to create a model to understand what's going on around you. Because we get sent down rabbit holes of arguments and we don't have anything to support what we're talking about, and people know they can play with us like that. Right? And so that's what I really want you to understand. Learn how to use data to create a model to understand the world going on around you. Because again, we're looking at 120K. But we're being told we got to do H-1B1 visa program because there's a shortage of excellent engineers. Okay, we're going to keep going with it. Okay, this is 5 million data points that we aggregated. Not 20,000, not 5,000, right? Salaries disproportionately weighted towards the lower band. So what we're seeing is that the salaries are pushed towards the lower end of the scale. 17% are 75K, so under 75K. 21% are 75K to 100K. 22% are 100K to 125. And then we got 15% are 125 to 150K. Right? So we know that 75% of the jobs are paying 150K and under. But we're being told we have to go and utilize this program to find the excellent people. So here's the salary bands. Big up to him for putting this together and color coding it. So greater than 250K. Here's 2024. It's this small amount of people right here that's making over $250,000 a year, right? Using this particular program. We're seeing the larger bands are the 75K and under, 75K to 100K. Then we talked about 100K to 125K, right? We do got a nice amount of people here. The 125, I'm sorry, I think that's the 150 to 200K. I'm sorry, that's the 125 to 150K. But the majority of the income is in these three levels here, right? Then they categorize them in the software IT related roles, which are in teal, and everything else is going to be in gray. That's here, right? The prominent job categories are tech related. The top two categories for software development roles are 1.1 million over 5 years by themselves. So if you can pull this up, let me see, can I pull this up real quick? You're not going to be able to see it. But we're seeing software development applications being the top one. We're seeing software developers being second, computer systems analysts being third, computer systems engineers being fourth, software developers, system software being fifth, and then going all the way down. Okay, so those are the top by occupation, right? Every role with 30K plus applications is a STEM field, with the exception of accountants and auditors. It'll blow your mind how many people they bringing over here H-1B1 to be accountants, as if we don't have good accountants inside the United States. But that's a whole other conversation, right? Now let's go viewing them by employers, okay? And here's what I want you to really understand. Looking at applications by employer, NAICS codes, computer system designs dwarfs everything else. The next one are universities and consulting. So we're going to go into it. We're looking at some of the large employers. So some of the companies going to be Google, IBM, Salesforce. They're the ones that are bringing people in. But the other large employers that the average person doesn't know about is going to be these particular employers. Cognizant, Infosys, which I've heard about before. I've heard of them. Tata Consultancy Services, Wipro, Capgemini, HCL, da-da-da-da-da. Cognizant's got 93K, H-1B1. Infosys got 61K. Tata Consultancy Service got 60K. These are not American companies. They are designed to fill international roles, right? So what they do is they're headquartered in Jersey. They go find people and they bring them over here, right? Infosys is an Indian company. Wipro is an Indian company. HCL Tech is an Indian company, right? So these are really Indian companies, even though Cognizant is based out of Jersey, and they are bringing in foreign people into the United States. So what we're seeing is, again, if we look at this particular situation, if you look at this slide, you may not be able to see it. Cognizant is leading applications by employer. They're leading, right? So what you have is you have a foreign company bringing foreign people over here. See what I'm talking about? But it took this dude going and pulling all this. So he's not going to have an argument with Elon Musk. He just went and pulled the data. He had to take time, take money. So big up to him because he did this for free. So this is the work that people won't do to understand what's going on. So now you just end up just arguing with folks. So we're seeing that these foreign, I would call, I don't know if you want to call them headhunter companies, but they're some type of staffing agencies. They're Indian-based companies. Their job is to bring these folks over here, and they're the leading group of people. So they're not the Fortune 500 companies that we would think. Their job is to hire these people and feed them into these roles. So they're like an intermediary. They're almost like a broker. And there's nothing wrong with that business model, but they're not it's not like the company is directly going after these folks on their own. They're using an intermediary because I know they got relationships in these particular areas, so they know where the people are at, right? So we talk about these particular companies are all Indian companies, and they're at the top people for these particular H-1B1 visas. So what jobs are these companies seeking visas for? 80K was computer systems analysts, 50K systems engineers, architects, programmers, and IT project managers, right? So we see that broken down here. So you see red is going to be this cognizant. Computer system analyst is in red. Okay, so here's the question we want to ask ourselves. Can we find computer systems analysts inside the United States that are better than Indians? Do we have that ability? Do we feel that there's such a shortage of excellent computer system analysts inside the United States? We are forced to go overseas to source those particular positions and bring them over here, because that's what we're being told. Because they said we're looking for excellent people. So America does not produce excellent people. Vivek's telling you that you have a culture of mediocrity because of your television, because your culture doesn't promote people that won the spelling bee and the math Olympiad as opposed to the jock and the homecoming queen. Even though when I was in high school, I know people that was the homecoming queen, the homecoming king. They also played sports, and he also was real good at school because that's how you get a scholarship. Where I'm from, you get a scholarship being good at sports and being good at school. I know very few people that just got scholarships just being good at sports, because to pull that off, you got to be really, really good. Like, you just can't be all right. You got to be really good if all you're going to lean is on sports. So most people I knew was trying to do it all. They was trying to play sports, do extracurricular, right? And then that made you popular, which made you the homecoming king or queen. But maybe, you know, when I went to high school, it was different than what it is now. I don't know how it is now because I'm not in high school. But again, are we short? I'm asking the audience, are we believing that there's a shortage of excellent people in these particular roles to where they have to be outsourced them across the world, primarily India, because that's what we're being told. But again, if they're excellent, how come that's not being showed in salary? See, so it's not matching up. But if I don't have the data, I don't have nothing to look at. I'm just arguing, and I'm just emoting and getting mad and yelling American first, yada, yada, yada. But where's the shortage at? So let's keep going, because there got to be a shortage. We got computer systems engineers, architects, Cognizant still leading in that. Then we got other companies that are outsourcing, right? Computer programmers, IT people, project manager, IT, software developer applications, software developers, right? So let's keep going. We're going to look at the average salary for each role, and he added a shaded band between 80K to 20K where the majority of salaries fall. I'm assuming that's the definition of that particular word, right? And he talks about, he spent his career in mergers and acquisitions, corporate finance. He's been involved in a lot of budget and hiring decisions. Unless we've overpaid every developer and IT person at every company I've ever worked at, 80-20K for roles like this is not market. And what he means is that when we're looking to hire people in these particular roles, they're not getting paid 80 to 20K. They're getting paid over that. So let me go to this slide right here. I believe that's the right slide. No, this is the right slide. Here's it. The gray is where the majority of salaries fall, right? Computer systems analyst is falling here. And this is between 80K and 120K. computer systems engineer architects between 80K. So we're seeing very few of these particular firms that primarily are Indian based are hiring outside of that group. They're all grouped up in here. So this is where most of the data is falling at. Computer programmers falling between 80K and 120K, right? IT project managers. We have one company, which is Cognizant, that's hiring outside of this, paying outside of that. Software development, software developers, computer occupations, software quality assurance, network computer systems administrators, management analysis, web developers. They're paying web developers well under that. So web developers are getting paid by all of these firms under the 80K. Data warehousing specialists, one is paying under, going all the way down. So again, how come the pay is not meeting what we're being told is excellent labor? So we're being told that we got to go find the best and brightest because we don't have them inside the United States. But when they're paying them, they're not paying them like they're the best and the brightest. So this don't add up. Because I would believe that if you're a genius tech person in STEM, if India has such this strong culture of producing excellent people in STEM, when they come to the United States, they could demand a premium for their skill set. You will believe that. Because Elon Musk tried to use Wemby and Jokic, but Wemby was good where he was at. They didn't draft Wemby because he was sorry. Jokic was good where he was at. The dude that played ball for Dallas, I knew he was going to be good because he was good where he was at. He wasn't an unknown person. Some of y'all don't remember Tony Parker. Tony Parker was playing pro ball at 17 years old. Manu Ginobili was good where he was at. Manu Ginobili was not an unknown person when he got drafted. They knew he could play. That's why they brought him over here. So trying to create this parallel between athletes, these European guys that come to the United States, they already know they can play. They not unknown quantities. It's not like we don't know what we got in this dude. We're going to bring him over and see. No, they know he can play. That's why they're bringing him over here. So again, we're seeing that the pay rates aren't really aligning with the best and the brightest. And these people are being fed into major organizations, major firms. We're going to get a little bit deeper into that. But it's not really matching up, right? So let me go back to that real quick. Okay. So the H-1B1 visa program is not just Indian companies requesting visas for IT workers. So this is a list of companies seeking visas for accountants, who's who are Big Four and other prominent accounting firms. Ernst & Young is crushing the competition with 16K plus applications, right? So we have Ernst & Young trying to fill applications for accountants using H-1B1. They're leading the list, right? Ernst & Young is being followed by Goldman, JP Morgan Chase, Citibank, right? Here are some of the roles in which Ernst & Young sought visas along with average salaries. Everything from accountants at 16K visas to computer system analysts to actuaries, right? So he talks about EY isn't a major player in the world of actuaries. There's a zero reason why they can't hire these people domestically. That's his opinion, right? So we zoom this in and you may not be able to see it. We pulled up Ernst & Young. We're seeing that they're looking to hire accountants, computer systems analysts, software developers, information systems analysts, database administrators, operations research analysts, financial and investment analysts, computer and information systems managers using this particular visa program. This can't be filled domestically. So America can't even produce accountants now, right? So that's what you got to understand, is that we're being told that we're going overseas, but they were told this about tech, but we're seeing this in other lanes also. So we're telling me that EY can't find accountants. He pulls up Amazon. We're seeing who they're hiring using this particular, and we're also seeing their average wage. So, excuse me, when you look at EY, the average wage for the accountants they're hiring using this particular program is about $102,000 for an accountant. I don't know what they pay on average for an accountant in that particular role. I don't know how those particular pays start to kick up as you work there longer. But for the people that they're bringing in using this program, that's about average what they're paying. But that's what they're looking for, accountants and auditors, because that role can't be filled domestically. So we got to bring in people from overseas to fill this particular role. So that's that. We talk about Amazon's. Google had 45 applications for software developers by itself. So Google's looking to bring in people through this particular program and software application. Is a total breakdown of that. So he talks about it. His summary is that a casual perusal of this data shows it's not a program for the top 0.1% of talent. This is simply a way to recruit hundreds of thousands of relatively lower wage IT and financial services professionals. So we're being sold that America is a landing place for the top talent in the world. And so what we're not doing is we're not internally producing the top talent. So we got to go overseas to get that talent, right? But people will argue that they're really not the top talent because they can't demand to pay. And they're not really getting paid like the top talent. So you got to kind of ask yourself where it falls out. But I've always believed that if you was one of the top people in the world at what you do, you will be able to demand that when you come to America. Because one thing about America, America can pay you. We can actually pay you what you're worth here. So why they're not getting it leaves the question. But if we don't have any data, we don't have anything to go on. So really quickly before we get out of here, because we were talking about this particular company. So this is from October 8th this year, right? New Jersey-based company that supplies IT workers through Silicon Valley in the Bay Area was intentionally discriminating against non-Indian workers and abusing the H-1B1 visa process, the jury has found. So the jury verdict against Cognizant, founded in this particular part of Jersey and now headquartered in New Jersey, came Friday in a class action lawsuit that revolved around claims that the firm abused the H-1B1 visa process. The visas intended for workers with specialized skills, and Silicon Valley tech firms rely on it heavily to secure top talent and also to obtain workers for lower level jobs via Cognizant and other staffing firms, right? We're not going to go through the whole article, but it's about people that identified as Caucasians, talking about how they were getting the short end of the stick. Franchitti, with a PhD in computer science, was hired in 2007 with 9 years at the company as a director and executive. Witnessed the company's preference for Indians on visas, the lawsuit claimed. When he secured new business for the company, his manager would staff the client projects with visa-holding employees from India rather than non-Indian members of Mr. Franchitti's group who were already in the U.S. and available to work, the lawsuit alleged. Franchitti was fired in 2016 after complaining repeatedly that he was made to sign hundreds of fraudulent invitation letters supporting H-1B visa applications for jobs that didn't exist, the lawsuit claimed, right? And so the jury recommended that the court hit Cognizant with punitive damages. So this has already gone through the court. So the same company we were talking about is leading in the H-1B1 visa program. They got sued that they was really stepping over Caucasians for Indians. Now, there's a deep, deep rabbit hole because I know a lot of people on Twitter that are in the tech space, especially on the West Coast. They can really give you a lot of insight on how these people move once they get over here. They're very group oriented. They're students of Dr. Claude Anderson, to be real with you. They don't move like black folks. If one get in, they finna bring everybody in. That's how they move, right? And they very much move on their caste level too. But that's how they move, right? But that's a whole other video that we can't get into. So that's what we want to talk about. So the reason why we want to bring that to the forefront is because we didn't just want to argue back and forth over whether or not people should study an extra hour after school or whether or not America has lost its edge, right? Because again, anytime immigrants talk to me about culture, that's cool. You know, everybody got their own culture. My question always is, how come it ain't work for you where you from? And I do not believe that these positions are being filled by foreigners because we can't find the people. I believe they're being filled by foreigners to push down the wages because capitalism works on surplus labor. Capitalism wants it to be to where I got 100 openings for a job and I got 500 people applying. Capitalism does not work if I got 100 people, if I have 100 openings for a job and there's 50 people that can do the job. Because what they got to do now is they have to overpay those 50 people to do those jobs. They don't want to do that. So they're always looking to increase the labor pool. So that's why when you get a job in this system, You have to constantly upskill yourself. You got to constantly network. You have to fight to keep your job, because the system is really designed to undermine your job, especially if you're an independent contractor. And if you're not organized labor or you don't have a contract for your job, you're an independent contractor. So your goal, what they're going to do is make you negotiate against yourself to get a job. So that's why people are scared to ask for a certain amount of money on the job, because they worry that they're going to come at odds with the job for the money that they ask you, because capitalism works when you're talking about unorganized labor to get you to compete against yourself. So that's why Erica often tells people, she's 100% correct, your pay raise comes when you leave your job, because your job ain't going to pay you, right? And I've seen people make too much money on a job, and the job look to run them out of there once they start making a certain amount of money, because they don't want to pay you anymore. You make too much. And they're looking to get rid of you and recycle people. What? And recycle you with somebody else that could come in and work cheaper. And that's really what they're looking to do. So that's all we're going to talk about. Like I say, we ain't going to be here too long. I'm going to put up the link if anybody want to come in, any questions, comments, disagreements. Buddy that just got banned, you could have came in and just talked, bro. You ain't have to do it the way you did it, but you know, everybody different. You could have just came in and had a discussion, buddy. But you know, a lot of them people on that MAGA side, man, they be mad. You know, they just, you know, I don't know, bro. So that's pinned in the chat. So Ray Gun, man, appreciate $2 super chat. Appreciate you coming through being a mod. AKW Beats, man, appreciate the $5 super chat. Get some skills to take the deal. These people got a plan for the world you live in. You better get a plan too. I feel you. Miss Phoenix, man, appreciate the $5 super chat. Always great evergreen content. Most definitely, that's what we try to make sure we bring to the table. And again, if you're new to what we're talking about, these are the videos in the particular playlist. They're on the channel. We're talking about surplus labor and why it's dangerous to be surplus labor in 2022. We got 3 or 4 videos around that. We also have why you need to become unemployed to stop inflation. One of the reasons why the market sold off on Friday is because the employment numbers came back very, very robust, which means what? We don't have enough unemployment, right, for the Fed to feel comfortable about cutting the interest rates, right? So they just going to keep the ball rolling. Joe Cool, man, appreciate the $5 super chat. So anybody got any questions, comments, and disagreements? So y'all treat this show like the relationship shows, right? Y'all come with that same kind of energy. Let's do it like that. Any questions, comments, and disagreements? So treat it like I'm talking about 50-50. And y'all line up and come through. Have that same kind of aggression and intensity, right? And we go ahead and get this thing started. So big up to Notary World, man. Notary World, stay safe out there. You know what I'm saying? Stay safe. But big up to you. You can hear me?
Yep, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, man. So what you got on the topic?
Yeah, so I'm just gonna be quick about it. Yeah, the issue is with, and just to kind of build upon what the last caller has said, the issue is with the tech sector in the US. Well, it's 2 things. I'm gonna say the first part from my perspective, especially with the smaller to medium-sized companies that get venture capital, they are highly pressured. And I think some of them cut corners aggressively, and they don't do it as often, but they will go offshore some stuff. And I think that pretty much erodes the quality, not only of the product, but also like indirectly their labor market. So they're kind of at odds with one another. Like, do I go cheap, or do I keep employing people in my home nation that cost me more? The second point I wanted to make, the kind of build upon, sports. I noticed you like basketball. I'm a big baseball fan. Mm-hmm. And the issue I see with the American tech sector, I'm in my 20s. It amazes me. People go to these games, like a Ravens game or a Falcons game or a Braves game, but they don't understand player development. By the time, your pitcher gets to the Atlanta Braves, he's done like it just in the professional development league, he's done maybe 5 years of development in, playing in Savannah, playing in Birmingham. I'm saying all to say the U.S. understands what player development looks like. They understand what it looks like in the athletic realm. They don't necessarily do it that good, in my opinion, because of lack of willpower. When it comes into tech, for a lot of the stuff, when it comes into like IT, whether it's like front end development, back end development, cloud computing, they could develop people to do this stuff. There's been a lack of willpower across the board to collectively get people, no matter the race, color, or creed, to become at least B-level players. We show up to arenas and football fields and baseball fields and watch these people play. Ben Roethlisberger didn't pop out at 7 and become a quarterback. He had a track. That I don't see that in the same realm in academics. But I will say this: the Indians, they understand that. When I've had that conversation, they start these kids off at like 7 on that track, like a Dominican baseball player. They say, hey, you're going to be this. We're going to put you in that direction. By the time that kid's 17, they're like halfway there.
Okay, but let me ask you a question from a development standpoint. So if they're so developed, why aren't we really seeing that in performance? Like I've known people that have worked with these people and they're like, these people really have the time to even know what they're talking about.
Let me be clear. I'm talking about some of the Indian Americans. Now, for foreign-born Indians, my suspicion is that the cream of their crop is either in their top 20 companies for tech, because quite frankly, why would they really want to leave?
Exactly.
Or the ones that are really good are already here. I mean, like the ones that are, from what I'm seeing, that are still coming over here, fresh off the boat, or the ones that people are offshoring to. This anecdotal opinion is subjective. They are middle tier, but I think the only reason that people really these Anglos in the U.S. and probably Europe really still play ball with them is really, quite frankly, because they're cheap. Yeah. You're pretty much going to like in a basketball equivalent, you're going to like Latvia and getting tier 2 players just to fill up a bench because you really don't want to pay the cost to get some SEC developed players. They might not be star players in the SEC, but they would cost you double. So you're like, hey, you know what? I'm gonna get a B player from US or a B player from Latvia. I'll just go to Latvia and pay half the price, and I can get a quantity over quality type of product.
Okay, that makes sense. All right, bro. I appreciate it. I'm gonna go to the next person. Appreciate it, bro.
Hey, Dave, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I'll just keep it quick. I have a background in accounting, so like when you mentioned EYs and how things are going in the accounting industry, I think the biggest challenge really stems to there really isn't many people that want to be accountants today. And I have that experience from just knowing people in academia. And I worked in Big Four accounting for a couple of years, and the turnover rate's high. You don't have many people wanting to be accountants coming out of college, so you'll see the push for accountants or people from other countries to come here. But again, I don't think it's a capacity thing. I think if people in America really wanted to do the profession and that had the desire, I think they could. But I just think that no one wants to be accountant anymore because in Big Four accounting, you work like 80-hour busy seasons. It's high turnover. It's not a peaceful environment for the amount of time you spend in most of the Big Four audit environment. So I think that's a bigger concern. And that's probably why from what I understand, many people go overseas and many companies go overseas for that. The high turnover in the stressful environment don't really attract the average college student or entry-level student coming into the profession. So that's just my take on things.
Okay, so how long you been in accounting?
10 years.
Okay, so I mean, you don't have any numbers, so we believe that, and I'm just saying this just off the top of my head, that there's like a negative growth rate for accountants inside the United States, or it's just not meeting the demand for accountants.
So you say negative growth rate or not meeting the demand?
So is it one of the two? So when I say negative growth rate, that means that the actual amount of accountants that are coming into the space every year that are American born is negative. So there's like way more people looking at them than accountants being produced. So as a result, we got to go overseas and get international people.
Well, so I think it's that,
okay.
But the other aspect that people don't really talk about in accounting is that in accounting, like in these Big Four firms, that they outsource a lot of work. So they don't need to bring in people for H-1B visas sometimes, right? The grunt work, and I've had it where they'll send work to India overnight while we'll be working a couple hours in the day. They would send the hard grunt work to India. We might overlook it and review it to make sure it's not, any errors are fixed, but they're doing a lot of the grunt work sometimes, depending on the type of role you have. So that's kind of in it, and they might be getting $10 an hour. So that's going to be cheaper than anything. I think that's the part that people don't know or see. And I've talked to like partners of accounting firms, and they'll say like they sent a tax return to people in India, and they would knock it out, and they'd see minimal errors. And that's something that I think people don't know about. That's probably the bigger concern compared to H-1B visas. The other aspect of it too, in accounting, people might blame AI for accounting, but really a lot of these countries do outsource a lot of work. They really do. And that's something that is the bigger concern that I don't know if you mentioned in this video, but that is probably a big concern to me if I was in the accounting field than H-1B visas. That's what I see.
Okay, so I appreciate your example, but why would they need, and I think you might have covered this, so repeat me for you repeating yourself. We know they can send the information overseas to firms overseas.
Correct.
So why would they need to do H-1B1 visa programs to bring people over here? So is there a reason why they're trying to staff people in America with that particular program?
I think there is some work that still has to be done in person. And there's some accounting work that needs to be done in person. You can't just do everything overseas. There's certain sensitive data that maybe certain groups wouldn't even want to send overseas. But I think it all goes back to when you deal with the people that are here. I just think we don't have many people that come into the accounting profession, stay in it, and do it for many years. I think the turnover rates are very high. And I think what happens is, because I had, I'm Nigerian, so I have, we're Nigerian born here. I have family that would come on an H-1B visa, and they came to work at a Big Four firm, and they held her there, and she couldn't really go anywhere, right? Because if she leaves, she's screwed. So that's kind of the game they play with that. You probably alluded to that. So that's the reason they do it. Like, I get the picture, and I agree with you on a lot of what you're saying. It's just that I do think the other concern really is that people don't want to be accountants as well. It's kind of like a multifaceted thing in my perspective. So
okay, that makes sense. I understand what you're saying. I appreciate you bringing that perspective on it, just not in that particular situation. I just didn't understand why EY would have a hard time filling. I thought it was just a cost issue. They just don't want to pay the people for the work that needs to be done. Because I think I wouldn't assume that every accounting position, and I'm not trying to be disrespectful to accountants, does it always require the best and the brightest? Are there roles that can be played that are not necessarily requiring the best and the brightest, and they feel like we can fill those with lower paid people and still get the same amount of work? Because I really believe that in every situation, we don't necessarily need the top of the field to get the job done.
Right. Yeah. And I just think, to my point, is like, I give you the picture that imagine if you came out of accounting, you came out and you were an American student, you graduated from college, you get in accounting, work for a couple of years, and you just leave, right? Because you realize it's not for you. And that just keeps happening, right? And you see that in your cycle. You don't want some stability. You want to have somebody there that would stay longer, even if they weren't the sharpest person in the job, right?
Exactly.
I'm not going to say that like every person that comes out the country that comes there is going to be perfect, but they're at least going to stay and you can work with them, right? They have nowhere to go based on the arrangements that's been set up typically. So I think that's the bigger situation. And I think that's to your point where I think it's being played by these companies. So
I understand. All right, man. I appreciate you coming through with your perspective, man, especially as an accountant, because that's something that I don't have any experience in. I have a CPA, but I just send in my taxes, and that's pretty much it. But I know that I didn't know it was that stressful of a job. I knew that for attorneys. So I appreciate you telling me that a lot of people aren't even staying in the field. I appreciate you. I knew it was a big drop off for attorneys, because I know a lot of attorneys that have dropped out because they didn't like it, but I didn't know it was that stressful.
It is, man.
Yeah, I didn't know that.
Yeah, and I just give one big point. Like,
go ahead.
The Big Four audit firms. I had friends. I stayed away from audit because audit was just too much hours, right? But I had friends in audit. I mean, again, they'd work 80 hours plus. Whenever the financial reports need to be generated, the 10Ks, quarterly reports, the audits, the time that takes, it's a lot of time. So the average person that wants to stay a partner in those higher up fields, it's very slim.
Okay.
So I think that's the issue. And a lot of people take that experience and maybe start their own business after a couple of years. Those Big Four firms look good on your resume, so people leave and start their own thing. But that's the big issue with firms. It's like no one really wants to stay because it's hard to balance that with your work life personally.
Yeah. I know people that worked in corporate law had the same issue. Yeah. So I know what you're talking about. Yeah, I feel you. All right, bro. I appreciate it, man.
All right, no problem.
Be easy.
Yeah, you too.
All right. So big up to Mr. A. So we're going to go through some of these comments. We're going to get up on out of here.